Hi, this is Boki, and today I'm going to go into more detail about what I think of when I think about diversity and why it's important to me. So the other day on Twitter, I participated in one of the DiverseAthon group chats that was hosted by Squibbles Reads, and I really found it helpful for me to kind of formulate my thoughts, make them a little bit more concrete, and think a lot more about issues and challenges that come up when you're thinking about representation and diversity. And one of the things that I realized is that I think in a lot of conversations about any topic, it's easy to end up in a situation where you basically agree with other people, but your basic definitions going into it aren't the same, and so any sense of disagreement is really coming down more to a difference in definition as opposed to actually having kind of a conflict of ideas. So the point of this for me is just to lay out what I think of as my definition of diversity. This isn't like a dictionary definition, it's more like a long, rambling sense of what are the ins and outs of what I think makes for good, diverse representations of marginalized groups. I also want to go into this with the caveat that my ideas about diversity are very much built around issues related to race and gender, because those are areas where I think I felt the most marginalized. If and when I do not bring other examples related to identities that are based on sexuality and gender identity, it's not because I don't think that they're important, it's because for me, I feel those are places where I am better off listening to other people talk about their stories as opposed to interjecting with arguments that might not be fully aware of all of the nuances that are related to these groups. My ideas of race are also very much informed by the fact that I grew up in the US as the daughter of two Indian immigrants, but race is incredibly complex, especially when you look on a global scale. I think in the US there's a lot of ethnicities and racial identities that kind of get condensed into one group for a lot of reasons. The people from those countries of origins might actually see themselves as more distinct than those categories would necessarily reveal. With that caveat, I'm probably still going to do that as well. So with those caveats, what I think of when I think of diversity and maybe more broadly representation is kind of the general mass of what's put out there. So not just like one book or one TV show or one movie in particular, but more about what those combinations of similar works say about a particular group. And what those works often say is that that group might not exist. So let's start off with looking at TV. There's this whole subset of TV shows that are basically about a group of four friends who live in New York City. That's kind of like a weirdly specific but also super broad genre, because really New York is such a big city that you can go in so many different places with it. There's also a lot of diversity in so many different ways. So let's think about some of the TV shows that are maybe the most well-known. There's Seinfeld, Friends, Sex and the City. None of them on their own have any responsibility to depict, for example, people of color, which is obviously fine by the creators because none of them really do in a meaningful way. On their own as a TV show, that's okay, I guess. Like, that's not a big deal. That doesn't necessarily say anything huge. But what it says as a group of TV shows, when you're kind of analyzing them as a whole, is that we have this whole genre about this big city with so many people, and the stories of the people of color who live in that city don't really have a place unless they're in a stereotype position. So remember when Girls came out, it was like this super hype show. People were kind of saying like, oh, it's the voice of generation. It's about these 420-somethings in New York. It's this different type of show where people lead messy lives and it's gonna be so great. Yeah, it was about this, it was another one of these shows that's about four friends in New York, and it was getting all this hype about how it was going to be different than these previous shows, but in the end, all four 20-somethings in this New York City show were white again. They were all white women. So just a disclaimer up front that I have not seen Girls, but no matter how good it is, the basic premise is rehashing a story that has already basically been told in some ways. Whatever other twist you're putting on it, if the core of your story is we want to tell stories about four white people who barely interact with people of color, well, great, you've got another show about that. And what, again, this is contributing to a set of works that basically are demonstrating a New York City where people of color don't really seem to exist, which kind of seems like a fantasy version of New York City. I think this represents kind of the fundamental frustration that underlies our conversations about diversity. So basically, when the stories that are most prevalent around you, whether it's just through the sheer act of publicity or hype or volume, when they all seem to suggest that you don't exist, the easy interpretation is that your story doesn't matter, that it's not interesting to people, and that you as a person are somehow not interesting because of some facet of your identity, or you are somehow less than. And honestly, at this point, this might sound weird, but I'm not even offended by that anymore. Like, it is offensive. I'm not offended because I know it's not true. What I am is just incredibly bored. And yeah, that means that I ignore a lot of popular works like Girls because of their lack of diversity. I do also watch shows that don't have diversity, or I read books or watch TV shows or movies that don't have diversity. Like, I watch the Marvel movies. They have huge issues with diversity, but I do enjoy them. And it doesn't make you somehow against the diversity cause to do that. At this point, I'm almost starting to find it willfully tiresome on the part of the writer when I'm reading my umpteenth book about a white heroine with her strong white male love interest and, of course, her convenient non-white sidekick, even if I do enjoy the book. And let's get into, your convenient non-white sidekick, because you know what the other issue is? When you minimize the presentation of an entire marginalized group to one or two people, the entire burden of representation gets placed on them. And that's a really, really easy way to dehumanize a character, fictional or real or whatever. When you tell someone that their main job is to represent their entire group of people based on one aspect of their identity, you're basically stripping them of their individuality, which is a key part of being a person. Representation is about both quantity and quality. No one wants to read a million books that feature one token side character from their group. On the other extreme, no one wants one book that lays out the entirety of their experience. When I was in high school, everyone would recommend The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri to me. The Namesake is a book about an immigrant Bengali family, which should kind of be the holy grail for me. My family is immigrant, we're Bengali. And there were a lot of stories in there that made it really enjoyable because I was like, yeah, that's super Bengali. Like, this family gathering, I have been to those family gatherings, and I loved that part of being able to find my experience in a book, especially the one that was getting so much acclaim. Except, you know who also hated that book? Me. It might be a good book, but it did not resonate with me. The main character especially, I did not care for him, which is, again, it's not the responsibility of that book to create a main character that I am going to resonate with. Compounding this frustration really was the fact that this was one of the few well-known books that I had at the time that kind of reflected, this huge part of my identity. It's a lot to put on a book, probably too much, because, one book cannot grasp at all of the nuances and complexities of belonging to a marginalized group, or really belonging to any group at all. There are people who love The Namesake who really find their story in there. I am not one of them. On the other hand, I really love Miss Marvel by G. Willow Wilson because Kamala Khan is a character who, even if I don't have superpowers, her experiences as an immigrant kid are something that I relate to a little bit more strongly. And of course, she can't speak for every first-gen kid either, which is why we need more and more representation. Another important aspect of this is recognizing that identity informs people's perspectives and their choices, but it doesn't define them. In the case of a character like Kamala Khan, for example, as the fact that she is the daughter of Muslim Pakistani immigrants, you might have some sense for some of the tensions that exist between the different cultures that she's engaging with on a daily basis. What's really important about the character is that the tension isn't her story. The story is how that tension and ultimately her ability to bridge her cultures informs her decisions to save people. And of course, if you had another superpowered daughter of Muslim Pakistani immigrants, you might have them make completely different choices. They might not experience that kind of culture clash at all. They might not be able to reconcile it. There's so many different ways that these stories unfold, and yeah, they have common roots, but they manifest in different ways for different people because, people are human and varied. We all experience things differently no matter how many similarities there are. So this is where my ideas about diversity are going to turn into this tortured analogy related to the major thing in my life, which is science. The way that I see it, anytime that you engage with pop culture, basically anytime you read a book or watch TV or watch a movie, you're basically kind of conducting an experiment or making some experimental observations. You might not think of it as making, you know, grand conclusions about the human condition, but you are collecting data about people and how they might respond to different situations. And that can go back to inform how you see people, how you see yourself, how you see different events in the world, how you see different places. That's kind of what I mean by the idea that you're collecting data and you're making experimental observations. So what do you do when you need to conduct an experiment? Well, first you need a large sample size if you really want to come to meaningful conclusions. You can't just flip a coin 2 times and come to any meaningful conclusion about, you know, the odds of landing on a head. You have to actually flip the coin a bunch of times. The same way, you need to read a lot of books or watch a lot of TV or watch a lot of movies to really understand maybe different ideas that are related to different marginalized groups. You need to hear from different voices. So for example, if you're not a trans person who grew up in the US, you can't just read one book about a trans teen in the US and think that you have now the scoop on the entire American trans experience. But the other thing is that you'll also never really have a large enough sample size to collect enough data about people, because experiences for every marginalized group are changing over time. They are dynamic. And this might sound like I'm prescribing like an exercise in futility, but I'm really not. I think what I'm recommending is to think of it as like a long time course where you're constantly sampling and taking in new ideas about different people, about different ideas, and kind of seeing how they change to inform whatever your current and maybe past and present ideas of a group of people are. The other part of running a good experiment is that you need good data. You need characters that aren't just stock, token, stereotyped characters. You need creators who are willing to put in the work to understand the worlds and the people that they're creating. You need diverse creators who can bring in different perspectives. This idea carries beyond pop culture to other areas like academia, politics, medicine. There are concrete reasons for why these fields need diversity. There's issues of like sexual harassment, of being able to give people the proper health care, literally being able to save people or represent their interests, that are actually important reasons for why representation in these fields is important. And I think the way that we engage with our pop culture informs how we see people belonging in these fields. This is a conversation that cycles back and forth between the works we create and the real world things that are happening. And it goes around and around, and sometimes we make steps forward and sometimes we make steps back. But I think what's exciting is that the internet has made a lot of these conversations kind of take place at a frequency and kind of at a volume that people are starting to think more and more about this. And with things like DiverseAthon, I think that actually that helps a lot. It's like these formal organized events help people create a dialogue around diversity, to think some more about what ways that they might be deficient, what ways their ideas are different from other people's. Yeah, so I really recommend participating in the DiverseAthon group chats that are still going on. I'll post a link to the schedule below because, like I said, it really did help me. I wish I could participate in more of them. I did miss the first one and the third one, but yeah, I think there'll be a few more. So yeah, so if you have like questions, if you disagree with my definitions, if you agree, anything, please feel free to comment below. I really don't mind disagreement. Respectful disagreement. So you can comment down below. Also, if you want to find me on Twitter, I'm really enjoying the conversations that I've had with people on Twitter. So that's another really great place to kind of talk. So yeah, bye.